Well, it's good to see Charles back. I let him out, or kicked him out of the hospital. I'm not sure which it is. I'm hearing different stories about that. But it's good to see you. Everybody knows multitasking. We all multitask. It's just what we do and who we are. And we juggle a lot of balls, and most times we consider it to be pretty good if we get all of the tasks accomplished that we need to have done. I was reading an article in, I'm sorry for getting uppity for the moment, the Harvard Business Review, 2000. I don't even know where I saw it, some doctor's office somewhere, and I just couldn't help it, picked it up and looked at it. The case for multitasking was the article, and they had done a bunch of studies with different corporations that work in teams. And what they found is that about a third of the teams did multitasking and thought that was really terrific and that they were their most efficient and their best when they did it that way. About a sixth of the teams were monochronic. That means they did one thing at a time. Okay? If you're a multitasker, you do polychronicity. New word for you. And they found that those who did one task at a time also preferred that worked well for them. And the studies did confirm that to do one thing at a time is a good way and the best way to do it, and they found that even people who multitask actually did one thing at a time. Did it fast, but they still did one thing at a time. The question becomes, of course, is how well you get it done, how well you actually accomplish it, whether it's done in all of the details that need to be tended to. I was talking to somebody this last week who was multitasking in their brain and on their phone while they were driving and drove 10 miles past their exit on 80 and had to turn around and come back. So you know how all of that works. I was reading an article by Thomas Merton, who is a contemplative monk. It's called Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, which would work for a contemplative who studies us and God. And he put a spin on multitasking. Listen. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit to too many projects, to want to help everyone in everything is itself to succumb to violence. The frenzy of the activist neutralizes his work for peace. It destroys his own inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of her own work, because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful. That really hit me pretty hard, thinking about multitasking as personal violence done to ourselves and our interior life. But as I thought about it more this week, it began to make some sense. Because when you go back and forth, and you're busy, you really don't get a chance a lot of times to really identify with and to communicate with that other person. And so we do a lot of surface work. So single tasking is a good thing to do. We can get deeper with each other. We don't get all fuzzed up, and we don't burn ourselves out. Paul, writing to Timothy, one of the young leaders of the church, was basically communicating that kind of message to Timothy, who was all filled up with stuff and was busy and wanted to build the church where he was and to gather leaders together and all of those kinds of things. And he was just busy. And Paul would wrote him 2 letters. This is the second letter that we have this morning, our second reading, in which Paul would simply say to him, simplify. Don't dumb down, but be, in verse 15, be an approved, blessed worker who explains the word of truth. And in verse 8, remember Jesus Christ, raised from the dead, a descendant of David. And when you think about David being a descendant, you think about the shepherd king, the good shepherd, which the choir sang about this morning. And so the advice that Paul is giving to Timothy is, hey, stay focused on one thing. Keep it simple when you talk to people about your faith and about your belief in a way that you understand it, always with the goal to being a person of good news and helpfulness, a good shepherd, because we too are descendants of David. And Paul quotes a hymnal confession in verse 11 and 12. And in verse 12 and 13, he suggests that let's not wind up wrangling over words. You know what that is if you've had any political conversations of late. I had somebody come in before the early service this morning, Alan Nebel, and so we started talking, and we both said after about 30 seconds, that's it, we're done. We're done. Nope, not doing it. Because you just get fuzzed up. And this is what happens oftentimes in religion, with politics, our personal lives. You can get fuzzed up with too much knowledge and too much philosophy. And Paul was simply saying to Timothy, hey, when you're going to do and practice your faith, do it in a way that you understand it, in a way that both makes sense to you, in a way that you can talk articulately about it, in language you understand, with the understanding that you are always called to be a good shepherd, a descendant of David, one who is called to help, guide, protect, uplift, save, and serve as needed to do. I was reading a little interview from Mother Teresa, who was just made a saint, St. Teresa of Calcutta. And she said this about her life. And you know, she was surrounded by hundreds of people in need all the time. And when she came out of her working areas, she was surrounded by hundreds of media people, cameras and reporters. But she said this, quote, I believe in person to person. Every person is Christ for me. And since there is only one Jesus, that person is the one person in the world at that moment. So the way in which she handled her Christian faith and her love of life was to see and seek the Christ in every single person, one at a time, with whom she dealt. That gave her no multitasking, but brought focus, simplicity, and purpose to whatever it was that she was doing. And that is how she handled her life. And that is what Paul is writing to Timothy about and saying to him, keep your life of faith, one which you can manage in a way so that you can see yourself as A, called to be a good shepherd, B, to take enough time so you can see the Christ, the value in the other person. And sometimes it's a little tough to find the value in another person. I know we all have those relationships and those occasions where we have trouble even finding the value in ourselves. The way in which Jesus handled it was, they asked at one time, there's six, what's the greatest and most important law? And there were 613 of them, 614 depending on how you count. And what did Jesus do? He summarized it into two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, strength, and mind. That's one. And your neighbor as yourself. That's two. So he narrowed down the focus of his life and ours by being able to say that loving God and loving our neighbor and caring for ourselves are all a piece of what it means to be a gospel person, a person of good news. So, when you're multitasking and you're getting yourself nuts, you love yourself a little bit. Oh, I know, it's from the cheap seats, it's easy to say, not so easy to do. But we can help each other with that sometimes. All you have to do is say it out loud. I'm tired, I'm working too hard, I'm really stressed. And we do that with each other frequently. And then it's time to act as St. Teresa. Seek the Christ and find the Christ in the other person, which means taking the time to do that so that we can authentically be good shepherds for each other and with each other. It's good news that you carry with you and that I carry with me. And it's the good news that God has planted us here in order to love our neighbors by being good shepherds, even as Jesus is your good shepherd. Amen.